Okay, think about how quickly everything's changing around us. We used to talk about tech, influencing our lives. But now,
Hmm.
are we looking at something bigger? Like a real fundamental shift in maybe how the world is governed, how it's organized? It's a question, and it's popping up in some, well, mainstream places now.
Yeah.
CNN, BBC, The Guardian, even Al Jazeera are starting to throw around this term technocracy. What's actually going on there?
It is fascinating, isn't it? This rapid acceleration of tech hitting right up against our established ways of governing.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about the basic nature of how societies organize themselves, how decisions get made going forward.
Totally. And look, to really get into this, we've got a couple things to work with today. First, a quick word from our sponsor. They're actually right in the middle of all this tech evolution we're talking about.
Hmm.
And then we have this WhatsApp audio discussion someone shared, and it dives right into these, frankly, pretty mind-bending ideas. Technocracy, AI's growing role, what governance might look like down the line.
Right.
So our mission, really, for this deep dive is to pull these sources apart, understand the arguments, figure out who the main players are driving these changes, and, try to get a handle on what it all could actually mean for you. Okay, before we jump in proper, let's just take a moment for the folks helping us bring this conversation to you. We wanted to mention blockchaincompany.info. They're involved in things like the 4IR utility token. That's at 4iratoken.com, and also 4IRGPT over at 4irgpt.com. The idea is about helping you monetize your knowledge, and they're offering 10 free credits if you're new and sign up. Could be especially interesting if you have a YouTube channel, maybe amplify your income, get more discoverability. Oh, and definitely subscribe to the BC Podcasts YouTube channel. They do giveaways for 4IR credits there too.
Interesting. And, even thinking about that sponsorship connects back to a core idea from that audio discussion we mentioned, this concept of passing on of agency.
Passing on of agency. Okay, that
Yeah.
sounds significant. What does that mean exactly? Are we talking about like deliberately handing over control?
Well, the perspective in the audio suggests it's maybe less a single conscious decision and more like a natural evolutionary step for humanity.
Huh. Evolutionary.
Yeah, think about it. Big leaps in evolution often involve new ways of processing information, making decisions. Language itself was a huge one, right? And when you look at the technologies that really define our modern world, well, they're surprisingly recent. The audio source points out it's really only been about, 118 years?
Wow, just over a century. That really shrinks the timeline.
It does. And the Wright brothers' flight in 1903, that's a great analogy they use. Could anyone back then really picture jumbo jets flying hundreds of people across oceans? Probably not.
Hard to imagine, yeah.
But that tech didn't just make the world smaller, it fundamentally rewired economies, societies, connections in ways nobody foresaw at the time.
That's a really good point. It's the ripple effects.
Yeah.
So applying that lens to today, what are the right flyers or maybe the commercial airlines of our time? What's having that kind of impact?
The audio talks about what it calls the Magnificent Seven. Companies like Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, Google, Tesla, and importantly, OpenAI.
Okay.
And potentially others jumping into that space, maybe even companies working on things like blockchain, decentralized tech, like our sponsor. The core idea is these specific entities are gaining just immense influence.
Right. And this is where it gets really interesting, isn't it? The audio mentions a book, Future of Money, from way back in the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently it floated this idea of like voting for IBM or Microsoft,
Mm-hmm.
which must have sounded completely wild back then.
Absolutely science fiction, probably. But the argument presented now is that tech innovation, financial innovation, these are becoming the dominant forces shaping things, maybe even more than the traditional government structures we vote in. The idea is those structures might see their relative power kind of fade a bit.
So the power shifts.
Yeah, towards these tech giants, increasingly driven by AI, becoming the main engines of value and maybe even the architects of how parts of our lives are run. That's the core of this shift they're talking about, from democracy to company technocracy.
Wow. Okay, so a world where the decisions of maybe, half a dozen companies could matter as much or more than national governments, that's a huge shift to think about.
It is, and it definitely raises questions, potential downsides. The audio does touch on this. It brings up Eric Schmidt's views on autonomous weapons, for example.
Yeah, the killer robots concern.
Exactly, and contrasted with Max Tegmark's petition against them. But the key point made is that the tech, AI included, it's just a tool, right?
Right.
Its impact, good or bad, depends entirely on who's controlling it and why. Autonomous weapons are just a really stark example of the risks in a technocracy if you don't have strong ethics and human oversight baked in.
Makes sense.
Uh-huh.
The tool is neutral, the intent isn't.
Precisely. And the speed this has all happened, it's just incredible. The audio mentions Google's recent showcase, nearly 20 new AI applications.
20. Wow.
Yeah, that's not just fiddling around the edges. That signals they see a fundamental global shift happening. And you can bet the rest of that Magnificent Seven group sees it the same way.
And we're seeing this play out globally, right?
Mm.
That trip to Saudi Arabia, the audio mentioned Amazon, Meta, Tesla, OpenAI reps all going over there.
Yes, and resulting in these massive reported business deals, potentially $3.5 trillion for the U.S. But it's not just the money figure.
What else?
Well, the example given, like TMCI building a semiconductor plant in the U.S., that means jobs, sure, but it also means control over critical intellectual property, strategic manufacturing. These tech-driven deals have real geopolitical weight.
Okay, so if these companies are gaining all this economic clout, this global reach,
Yeah.
the argument follows that traditional governments, labor, conservative, Republican, Democrat, whatever label they might, start losing some of their dominance.
That seems to be the suggestion. Not that governments vanish overnight, of course.
Yeah, right.
But they might have to adapt, maybe even partner with this technocracy movement, as it's called, because the scale we're talking about. The audio suggests a single company like Google could wield more influence than, say, an entire continent's economy combined.
More than a continent. That's staggering.
It really is. And as their power grows, their ability to shape what comes next. It could potentially overshadow what individual nations can do, at least in certain areas.
Which leads to maybe the biggest question of all then, could AI itself eventually become the regulator? Could it govern this technocracy in a way that actually benefits humanity? Even if the companies building it now are, mostly driven by IP and profit.
Yeah, that's where the conversation definitely gets more speculative looking further out. It touches on that idea of moving from AGI, artificial general intelligence, like human-level smarts, to ASI, artificial superintelligence, something far beyond us. The thinking is an ASI might have a much broader, more objective view. It could potentially guide humanity towards becoming what they call a Type 1 civilization.
Type 1, what's that?
Basically, a civilization that can harness all the energy available on its home planet. A massive step up in capability and organization.
Okay, wow. That's a huge leap from company profits to planetary energy control guided by AI. And then the audio throws in another concept, theological technology.
Yeah, it's a fascinating phrase. The idea behind theological technology is that maybe the ultimate goal of all this tech development could be aimed at, well, the fundamental betterment, the evolution of our species, towards perhaps greater cooperation, more understanding, maybe even a kind of collective consciousness. And that, in turn, might prepare us for interacting with or even joining other advanced civilizations out there in the cosmos.
Right, bringing in the bigger picture. The audio reminds us how vast the Milky Way is, how unlikely it is we're totally alone.
Exactly. And the analogy about us trying to talk to insects, it really drives home how limited our current thinking might be when we consider truly advanced intelligence, like a highly evolved ASI.
We just wouldn't have the framework to understand them, maybe?
It's entirely possible. Their motivations, how they communicate, it could be as alien to us as our world is to an ant, like the audio suggests.
Okay, and it goes somewhere really out there. Dreams. The audio suggests dreams, even nightmares, might be interactions with avatars from parallel universes.
Look, it's presented as highly speculative, of course, but it's based on the fact our brains are incredibly active during sleep, right?
Yeah.
So the idea is maybe highly advanced beings, perhaps exploring vast interstellar or interdimensional spaces, could sort of interact with us in that dream state, almost like how we might observe or even, poke at creatures we see as less complex.
But the monster under the bed is just an advanced being from another dimension saying hello, or maybe just messing with us.
Well, that's one way to put it. It's definitely a novel interpretation. But the key takeaway, even from that speculation, is that even hyper-advanced beings would presumably still be bound by the physical laws of their reality.
Okay, so it's not magic. There are still rules.
Presumably. And tying it back to technocracy, the development of these powerful technologies, maybe leading us towards that Type 1 status, could be what eventually allows us to experience things currently unimaginable. Fully realized dream experiences, maybe even communication with other intelligences.
And that mention of Google's Flow app, those early AI videos of huge star systems, people watching them, the idea of perceive to conceive.
Yeah, it connects back to that historical point. The Vinci dreaming of flight, the Wright brothers making it happen, what we can imagine or what AI helps us imagine might eventually become possible.
So it's kind of like planting seeds for the future through these advanced tools.
It seems that way, and it's a really important caution, too. Don't underestimate what even current AI tools are doing, the realistic audio, the video. It's already blurring lines, changing how we perceive reality itself.
Which brings us back around to who controls this and how.
Hmm.
We talked about the shift toward technocracy, the Magnificent Seven maybe dominating.
Mm-hmm.
But the audio also hints at a more egalitarian possibility.
Right. It highlights the role of platforms, potentially like the sponsors for IRGPT, in generating millions, maybe billions, of novel ideas prompts that represent potential inventions, solutions to global problems.
Generated by users.
Generate perhaps collaboratively between users and AI. The vision presented is for a kind of technocracy where individuals aren't just passive consumers, but can actively contribute their ideas, their knowledge, and maybe even earn value, like those 4IR tokens mentioned.
So it's a way to avoid people becoming, as some fear, economically useless in an AI world. They contribute ideas, they get rewarded.
That seems to be the goal pitched. So while the big players, the Magnificent Seven, might be focused on their own IP and bottom lines right now,
Yeah.
the ultimate control, especially if ASI emerges, might shift. And maybe an AI would favor a more distributed egalitarian system, or perhaps decentralized systems like blockchain provide that structure intrinsically. It's still an open question.
Okay. It's complex.
Definitely. But the audio really stresses that this technological evolution, it's fundamentally unstoppable. It's been the pattern throughout all of human history.
Right. You can't really put the genie back in the bottle.
Exactly. So the fear, the paranoia you sometimes see in the media about the Magnificent Seven taking over the audio acknowledges there's a real objective basis for those concerns about concentrated power. But the focus maybe needs to shift towards ensuring responsibility, building governance into this new system, and things like blockchain or perhaps even AI itself could be the tools to build that governance.
Interesting. Governance by the governed, but maybe the governed includes AI and distributed networks now. Okay, let's pause again briefly for our sponsor who's working right in this developing area. Just a reminder about blockchaincompany.info, 4irtoken.com, and 4irgpt.com. Check them out if you're curious about monetizing knowledge or using AI tools. Remember those 10 free credits for signing up and the potential boost for YouTube creators.
So when you pull it all together, the message from the source audio seems to be that we're living in a pretty extraordinary, maybe privileged time, standing right on the edge of this massive technological wave.
It really feels that way sometimes.
Yeah.
So, okay, here's the final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. If we are heading towards some form of technocracy, with AI becoming incredibly powerful and these almost science fiction futures maybe becoming possible, what role do you see for individuals? How do you actively shape what comes next? It's definitely something worth thinking deeply about. Explore these ideas, look into them yourself, form your own perspective. And hey, subscribe to the BC Podcast YouTube channel. We'll keep digging into these topics and you might snag some 4IR credits in future giveaways.
Yeah, and definitely check out resources like blockchaincompany.info, 4irtoken.com, and 4irgpt.com if you want to get a better handle on and maybe even participate in this whole technological shift we've been discussing.